Okay, I'm just recording, obviously, for those that can't make it and want to definitely catch the rerun. But I'm going to start over. My name is Alexis de Jesus. I am the Partnerships and Events Director for Tequeria. It is so great to see some familiar names in here. Shout out to Ox. I see you ready to take some notes. Rebecca, you were actually at our summit. It's very nice to see you here. But yeah, so thank you all for joining us today. Today's conversation is how to build an inclusive culture for todos. As we know, we are finishing off Latina Heritage Month very strong, and we're definitely finishing it off with one of our brilliant partners, Multiverse. So I'm going to introduce the two panelists today, and give me 1 second. So we are being joined today by Diego Zeceña. He is the candidate success lead of global admissions at Multiverse, and Sean Chinn, aka Chinn, and he is the diversity, equity, and inclusion program manager at Multiverse. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Multiverse, they have been, so Tequeria, we just had this partnership with them as of this year, but they do really, really amazing things. They are headquartered in the UK and also have a US campus. And their mission is to create a diverse group of leaders, future leaders. And to achieve this, they provide high quality professional apprenticeship programs that combine work, training, and community. And yes, you heard it right, apprenticeship program. So if you're looking for something like that, please make sure you connect with Sean or Diego today, and maybe they can, help you guys out and, push you to the best pathway for you. And then I'm just going to take a breath for a second. I'm going to pass it off to either Diego or Sean if you guys want to mention anything else that I missed about Multiverse, any other details.
Yeah, sure thing. Alexis, thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to be here today. Good to see everyone.
Thank you. Excited. Okay, so we're gonna get started. Let's just dive right into it. So again, today's conversation is how to build an inclusive culture for todos. And obviously, we are in a time where diversity, equity, and inclusion is super important, right? And it's not only important just for organizations and companies, but really, really to hold these organizations accountable and to follow up on whatever actions they say they're going to accomplish, right? So this is why today's conversation is super important, because there's so many tips of like how to establish company policies and practices and just combating microaggressions. So thank you all for being here. And we're just going to dive in right to the first question. And we're going to start with Diego. What specific company policies or practices do you believe contribute to an inclusive workplace for the Latina employees?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Alexis. And as I put in the chat, it's super great to see a lot of people from Multiverse here. Appreciate you all. Feel the love, and I'm glad to see allyship just coming together. I'll quickly just introduce myself for those of you who I don't know. Obviously, my name is Diego. I am proudly to be from Guatemala. I was born there, but I was one of the privileged ones of moving to the US when I was 6. I grew up on Long Island, and I would say on Long Island, growing up there is where my passion for social justice really grew and was born. I started my career in education, specifically teaching 6th and 7th grade here in Brooklyn. I then transitioned to a nonprofit organization where I worked with first-gen college students, helping them land their first career. After the nonprofit, I came to Multiverse, this lovely place, where I'm able to incorporate my love and passion for social justice, education, and early talent. As Alexis shared, my title is Candidate Success Lead, meaning that I support all of our external early talent candidates who are trying to land an apprenticeship. But going to your question, Alexis, I very much love this question, and I love that we're starting here, because I think one of the most simple ways that we can really ensure that companies are contributing to an inclusive workplace is continuing to partner with organizations like Tequeria that seek to increase the representation of diverse candidates. In my experience, many companies have had DEI specific goals and metrics, but when there are market dips and other priorities come up, DEI tends to take a back seat. people tend to forget about these initiatives, right? So partnering with organizations not only will hold these companies accountable, as you said, but also ensure that DEI-specific initiatives don't get put on the back burner and are given the time and focus that they deserve. And then I would also add, right, and this is very pertinent to this event, that this is extremely important because when you look at the numbers of employees who identify as Latino and who work in tech in some capacity, it's clear that there's more work to be done to increase Latino representation. So again, we must continue to partner with these organizations who are looking to make positive changes and have that as their mission. I was sharing this with Chinn earlier, but personally, I didn't learn of Tequeria till I was an employee at Multiverse, right? And I know that many Latinos are in that same boat. So again, going to your question, this is why it's super important that we must really push companies to continue partnering with organizations so that they can make spaces like these visible to people from diverse experiences, specifically in the Latino community.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think you touched on something so great, especially how you just, admitted like you didn't know about Tequeria until you got to Multiverse. That happens a lot. It happens more often than you think. And not just with Tequeria, but even with other communities like out in tech that supports the LGBTQ plus community, or Blacks in tech that supports the Black community. So there's all these amazing things that people don't know about until they actually, get introduced to it by their company that are pushing ERG initiatives or DEI initiatives. So I think it's really great that you mentioned that as your answer, and I appreciate it. Sean, I'm going to pass it on to you. Same question, and I'll repeat it. What specific company policies or practices do you believe contribute to an inclusive workplace for the Latinx employees, or even just Black and Brown communities in general?
Yes, thanks, Lex. Appreciate your question. Everyone, again, my name is Chinn. Been with Multiverse now for 2 years. I'm currently sitting as the interim DEI program manager. I was formerly a DBA coach. And so for those of you who may be looking for apprenticeships, we can't wait to discuss what that looks like later on. I will also just share a little bit about my background. Just like Diego, also in education, spent tons of time with Teach for America, teaching high school, middle school, and elementary school students. Back home in my hometown, Miami, Florida, I lived in a predominantly Latino community. And so I definitely spent a lot of time focusing on social justice for not only like education, but just Black and Brown people in general. And so I wanted to make sure I led with that piece. And then I'll also just quickly shift gears and touch on that question, Lex. I think one of the interesting things here is that the Latino community represents about 18% of the total US population. But when we're looking at our STEM-related workforce, so we're thinking science, technology, engineering, math, that workforce only makes up about 8% Latinos, right? And when we're looking at Latinos in tech is very similar. With that being said, companies that understand what's happening on a societal level and are intentionally making efforts to increase representation should be top of line, top priority for everyone. And so one of the things I appreciate in your response, Diego, is just highlighting Tequeria and specifically how continuous partnerships with organizations like Tequeria will actually lead to the outcomes that we hope to see, and that's really diversifying the workforce.
I appreciate that. And I know a couple of people that are part of the Tequeria community are here and they're ready to work for Multiverse. So, if Multiverse, needs some diversification or whatever the case, there's already a few people in here that I know I can just shift off or ship off over to you guys. But thank you so much for that answer. I appreciate it. We are going to move into the next conversation, which I think all of us have dealt with at one point in our careers, if not multiple times. And that is addressing microaggressions and stereotypes. I'm known as the spicy, angry Latina in all of my former work jobs. It is what it is. I'm much calmer now. I have to admit, I was a little spicy. So with that being said, though, what strategies can we implement to address and combat microaggressions and stereotypes that might hinder the experience of the Latina employees in the workplace? And we'll start with Diego again on this one. And
Yeah, I
happy
was
to
gonna.
repeat the question. I know that that was like a mouthful. Happy to repeat the question.
No, 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 you're fine, Alexis. Thank you. And I was gonna add that, funnily enough, I've also been called spicy in other workplaces, not multiverse. So again, I think that the importance of this question, right, of like really targeting and addressing what microaggressions are. And I think my answer might seem a bit simple, but it's super, super important. And ultimately, I think it's all about asking questions, specifically asking the person how they want to be addressed. And this can be as simple as just asking how their name is pronounced before every interaction that you have with them, right? And then what I add to that is like actually making a genuine attempt to say that name correctly. Now, I would add that this is super important because names hold power, right? And they mean a lot to us and communicate subconsciously or not that we belong in these corporate spaces. Now, for those of you who I've chatted with before, have probably heard this before, but I obviously have a very Latino traditional name, right? My full name, it's in my government passport, is Diego Andres Zeceña Gonzalez, right? Like very, very Latino, very heavy with those Spanish accents, right? But as I shared before, I grew up on Long Island. And as you can all imagine, my name was not pronounced correctly, right? It would be a version of Cecina, Sakina, right? You name it, I've heard it all. And again, what I would say is that I learned subconsciously or not that I didn't belong in these predominant white spaces, right? So I grew very uncomfortable. I got super anxious and even got to a point where I would question myself and I would say, am I making it a big deal, right? Going back to your point, Alexis, like, am I being angry for no reason? Am I getting upset for pronunciation of a name? And then ultimately, right, like that really makes me think and gets me in that mindset of what I shared of that I don't belong into these spaces. Now, what I'll add is that this hasn't been the norm in most of my corporate experiences, right? Specifically, as I shared, I started my career in teaching, and one of the things that really, really resonates with me is how my students owned the pronunciation of my name. During the first week of school, I would tell them like, hey, this is how you pronounce my name. This is where it comes from, right? Like obviously, for those of you who've been in the classroom know what you do during the first couple of days. And my students really owned it, right? Like, and they really took that upon themselves to correct one another whenever somebody would not pronounce my name correctly. And even to the point of like correcting other teachers. And they would do it obviously in like in a respectful manner, but they're like, no, like that is not Mr. Sakina, it is Mr. Zeceña, right? And going back to the effects, the negative effects of like not pronouncing a name correctly, what that communicated to me was that one, my students cared about me and they made an effort to get to know me, to get to know how they pronounce my name. And then ultimately they took it upon themselves to be allies and share like, hey, what you're doing is not okay, right? Like what you're doing is not the way that our teacher wants to be called. And this is how, and they would even practice saying it with them. So to your question, I think this is a very simple, might seem like low-hanging fruit, but it's just simply asking questions and then making a genuine attempt to address people the way that they want to be addressed.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? And maybe it's something that a lot of us didn't do. Like you said you grew up on Long Island. I grew up in a very, white part of Jersey, and I never even thought of doing that. I just kind of gave up. And so, but keep on like that push and support that you even had from your students is actually really amazing to hear. So yeah, so I'm gonna go right over to Sean. Thank you, by the way, for sharing that. Or to Chinn, sorry. I'm trying to be so like correct and say Sean.
No
I'm gonna
worries, no worries.
Same question though. What strategies can we implement to address and combat microaggressions and stereotypes that can hinder the experience of the Latina employees in the workplace?
Absolutely. First of all, again, shout out to Diego. I think just discussing like the importance of getting someone's name right is such a huge first step. But I'd love to just quickly address a culture of call in and call out. I think that's a really effective strategy in terms of combating microaggressions in the workplace. And I'll go a little bit deeper here. When I'm saying call in, I'm specifically referring to opportunities to share feedback with a particular individual And sometimes sharing that feedback might involve perhaps allies or managers. And then when I'm saying call out, I'm more so thinking about setting boundaries that are shared across the workplace so that all employees are very clear on what stepping out of bounds looks and sounds like. And most importantly, understand the impact of stepping out of boundaries, right? I'll go a little bit deeper, just giving an example of this. I think for me specifically, as I reflect on my experiences as a Black male, I think about moments in which me being passionate may easily be misconstrued for me being angry or upset, right? And that one is very, very common, not only for Black people, but for Brown people as well. And so given that, I have, again, an opportunity to call in or call out. And believe it or not, that call out starts first, right? Educating your team on what should not take place and the impact that it has on an individual is most important. And so when we're educating a team, that when we're using stereotypes such as maybe the angry minority, that one suggests that someone's passion or excitement is not valuable or not valued, right? And then it leads to this really, really interesting place. I heard you mention it earlier, Diego, where you're kind of confused after being microaggressed. Like, what am I supposed to do now? This, it's not like a direct attack, but it also is pretty subtle and it's really complex to deal with. And am I able to share this and escalate this where someone else, maybe who doesn't look like me, will actually understand the impact here? And so again, that call out culture starts with tons of education and boundaries. And to that last piece, the resolve, and that's the hope that I'm really, really pushing for. The resolve here is the call in piece, where you're able to share feedback and explain to someone, and we can just use the SBI model, situation, behavior, impact, right? To quickly articulate, hey, this is what happened, this is the impact of that, how do we move forward? And I think when we have that call in, call out culture and we're practicing that, we're really setting up an entire organization for success.
What a fabulous answer. Like, wow, I'm just like, this is a great idea to like implement. Everyone should have that. The call in, call out culture. I am a big fan. 5 out of 5 for that answer. So sorry. So we're gonna push forward. We already have we're actually cutting the session shorter today. But don't worry, there's a lot of great questions going on, and we're gonna have time for people to ask all the questions they want. But we're going to move on to promoting intersectionality and inclusivity. So how can we assure that our inclusivity efforts consider the intersectionality of identities and not just focusing on one aspect of diversity? Oh, sorry. We can actually start with Chinn on this one.
Yeah, I think intersectionality is so important. And most importantly here, understanding that we all, no matter who you are, we all have some shared identities and identities that actually cross paths. And that's the gold nugget there when we're discussing intersectionality. For myself, I'm Black and gay and neurodiverse, right? And so all of these identities, they definitely comprise who I am. And I think what's interesting here is when we are creating a culture, again, going back to just education, when we're creating a culture where it's okay to have multiple identities, then we're not creating these weird spaces where you have to check a box or identify as just one. And I think that's one of the really difficult things as a minority. You find yourself looking at company ERGs and trying to determine, okay, am I going to go to the Black one? Am I going to go to the Latino one? Am I going to go to Pride? We should be thinking about how do we create spaces for all identities to coexist. And so I've recently had this conversation with two of our ERG chairs, Black and Multiverse chair, Naaman Brown, and Vass, who's over our LGBT ERG. And for November, we're actually putting together a movie night just to bring around trans awareness, right? Now, when we're thinking about this identity of transgender, it's so easy to kind of just get caught up in just one identity there. But we're thinking about, what about racial or ethnic identities? And so both of these ERGs are coming together to co-host an event, a movie night. They'll be showcasing the movie Paris is Burning, right? And to spark conversation around trans awareness, which is a big moment for November. I hope to look for more opportunities like this in the future, where organizations are thinking about intersectionality and finding opportunities to activate those moments and really educate employees.
Thank you so much for that answer, and I appreciate it. I'm going to move on to Diego with the same exact question. So,
Yeah.
yeah, do you need me to repeat it? Sorry, more than happy to do so.
No, you're good. I actually love this question. I was like chatting with Chinn, and I really, what you shared, Chinn, like really resonates with me. And I think even in the context of this conversation, right, of like talking about Latinidad in general, we had a celebration last week in the office and was able to like share a couple of like quick facts about the terms of like where Latino comes from, Hispanic, Latinx, Latinx. And one of my favorite things when talking to other people, and the Latino people on this call might be able to resonate, right, is what Latinidad actually encompasses, right? And the fact that this is a pan-ethnic term, is not a race, is not an ethnicity. It's a term that was created here in the US to identify a very diverse group of peoples, right? Which is why you can have some white Latinos, some Afro Latinos, some indigenous Latinos, right? Like we are super, super diverse. So for me, this idea of intersectionality, going back to Chinn's point, is ultimately educating ourselves about the various identities that we hold, but also, as Chinn said, trying to think about the different identities that other people possess, right? We're not just Black, we're not just Latino, we're not just Indigenous, we are a combination of those various different things. So I would say, in order to consider intersectionality is to really pinpoint the different identities that address this, right? Going back to the idea of Latino, I think personally, many people on this call could probably relate when you see political news, right? Specifically in like 2020 and 2016, and people reporting about like Latino population tending to vote for this one party over the other, right? And I'm like, yes, but like that is not the way that we should be looking at it, right? Like we should be looking at it from like various different lenses, because again, Latinidad encompasses so many different pieces of identity. And then I think in my end, kind of what Chinn said, what has really helped me bring my idea of like Hispanic Latinidad to play is really confronting all of the different pieces that make me Latino, right? Like I am bilingual, I am a native Spanish speaker, I'm undocumented, right? All of those different experiences and identities have contributed to where I'm at today. And I wouldn't be where I'm at had I not had those experiences, right? Like had I not been able to experience the world as an undocumented person trying to go to college, right? Or as somebody who had to learn the English language, right? Like teaching English at a middle school. So I would say intersectionality is going back to Chinn's point of just identifying all of those different pieces of identity that people possess, and also reflecting and thinking about your own intersection of identities.
Thank you so much, man. I'm so happy that you two are our panelists for this session today. You guys are giving such amazing answers, and I'm more than sure that I'm actually, if you see me kind of looking to the side, it's because I'm taking notes, because I'd also like to bring everything that you're saying to folks that aren't attending today in general, and some folks that just need to hear certain things. So really, really happy that you mentioned everything you've mentioned, and we do have a few minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open it to our audience. If anyone has any questions, like please feel free to just drop it in the chat. I'll give you guys a couple minutes. I know, Oscar, I know you said you were taking notes. So if you have any questions about your notes that you took, please feel free to ask away. And while those are going to come in, oh, sorry. My neighbor downstairs is also just randomly decided to do construction. So sorry about that. My last question for you guys is, what steps do you recommend to ensure our workspace is not only diverse, but inclusive? where are all the voices heard, where all the voices are heard and valued. So I'm going to start with Diego on this one.
Yeah, so when I saw this question, I think what really stood out to me was the idea of like all voices being heard and valued, right? So I think one is identifying and elevating the voices of people who don't tend to speak and or share the experience of the majority. I think practical ways can be creating spaces where they can share more about their diverse experience. And now these include, right, like celebrations during specific holidays and inviting these people to speak about this holiday and share more about why this holiday even exists, right? Fireside chats like this, right? Like, hey, come and share about your experience and educate us. And the reason why I say this is because many times people from diverse backgrounds, and I'll just speak personally, right? We tend to not speak up. And this is where imposter syndrome really comes into play. We start questioning ourselves, going back to that microaggression question, right? Where it's like, am I being the spicy Latino? Am I being the angry person? Like, am I going to share something that's not going to stick with other people? So I would say a very practical way is creating these spaces and being very intentional about who you're selecting to speak. Obviously, I'm speaking here at this fireside chat, so I do appreciate Chinn as our interim DEI manager, but also Multiverse as a whole, right? Of like thinking about like what are the celebrations that we need to really hold space for our employees who come from these diverse backgrounds. As I shared last week, really felt the love and seeing how many people were engaging, answering trivia questions. I was able to share a little bit more about my culture, right? Like Quetzal, coming from Guatemala. So like those are things that I would say is a way where we can really hold space and ensure that people who don't tend to speak are the ones who are speaking and sharing about their diverse experiences.
I love that. Thank you so much. And I completely agree with you saying like creating the spaces and being intentional about who you're selecting. Obviously, Chinn had you in mind for this conversation for a reason, right? Very intentional. And we appreciate him. And Chinn, we appreciate you for also joining this conversation. I am gonna pass this question on to you as well. And there is one question in the audience. So as soon as you answer this question, we'll get to Denise's question. So again, what steps do you recommend to ensure our workspace is not only diverse, but also inclusive, where all voices are heard and valued?
Thanks so much. I'll be really brief. I think Diego did a fantastic job touching on the importance of voice and visibility. Just to echo that, one thing that we do at Multiverse that I greatly appreciate, and I would recommend this for every organization, is randomized coffee chats. Literally, there's a random coffee chat generator and it pairs people up across the organization. And what that does, it allows us to take 15 minutes to get to know someone that we normally would not schedule a coffee chat with. And just building rapport and relation, right? That is so important. I think we are people and DEI work is people work. Inclusion is all people work. And I want to make sure that I'm stamping that. I'll step back because I know there were some questions that we wanted to get to, but just want to make sure I'm stamping this last thing here. If there's anything that I could share, it would be let's continue to be people first. Let's continue building relationships and let's do it intentionally so that it's not always individuals that look like us or sound like us.
Ooh, thank you. I love that. Let's continue to be people first. Yeah, when you mentioned like the coffee pairing, a few of our members are like, oh, donuts. We have the same thing on our Slack channel that we do. So this question is from Denise. So she said, or I'm sorry, I don't know your pronouns, so I'm not going to assume. So Denise asked, loving this chat, how do you answer the question of how diverse is your team given the concept of intersectionality? People usually think about gender as diversity. I'll give it to Chinn. You can start off with answering this question.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question. And I'll also just add, normally when I hear diversity being mentioned, it's normally around like race or ethnicity or like external factors that could quickly be identified. but I would even push us to think about like diversity of thought. I would have us even think about like having diverse experiences, or even in terms of like tenure or seniority. Diversity is such a huge term, and it encompasses so much. So I think when we're being a lot more intentional and really defining what we mean and what we're measuring or what we're tracking, we're really creating an opportunity for diversity to not be a one-dimensional thing. And that's what I hope that as an organization, we do more of, is like discuss diversity in different terms. So whether it's gender, whether it's race or ethnicity, whether it's age or age group, ability status, whatever the case may be, being able to really unpack diversity means being a lot more intentional and not just using a one-dimensional term. So I love that you mentioned that. Thanks for that question.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering. Denise, I hope Chinn was able to answer your question. I thought that was a great answer. So, but we are just about at time. So I just want to thank everyone so much for joining today. Big shout out to Multiverse, to Chinn, to Diego, to the rest of the Multiverse team for joining us and putting this together. Oscar, I know this was shorter, but don't worry, we're gonna have more events. And the trick is, we've all learned that we've had our seminars before and attention spans go out the window. So we are keeping it nice and short for that reason. But that means it's good. That means you guys want more of this. So we will definitely be doing more of these in the future, especially with Multiverse. And if you guys have any other questions, like please feel free to reach out to us. And for those that attended the call, look out for an email, because you're going to be receiving all the notes that I've also taken. And we're going to do a nice little recap across our social media pages as well. So thank you all so much. Yes, love the honesty. Good. I'm glad to hear, Beatrice. Thank you so much. We appreciate you all. And shout out again to Diego and Chinn. Do you guys have anything to say before we end the call?
No, just thank you guys for having us. I think several people started connecting on LinkedIn. So yes, always looking to connect, especially with other fellow Latina folks, especially if you're in the New York City area, which is where both Chinn and I are based. So thank you all for having us.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.